Alrighty, let's go. Wow, this is too bright, I think. Oh no, the swivel has been reduced. Is that better? How y'all doing, chat? I was off this week. We are working on a super secret project, but the super secret project has taken a step back for a little bit, and we found ourselves having a little bit of extra time. So we're here, and we've got some cool stuff to talk about today, so I hope y'all are doing well. New Batmobile. No, we're still working on the old one. Yeah, not off. We were just taking a break from stream to do other kinds of work. So lighting is a little bit better. I feel like this could be zoomed in a little bit, but whatevs. How y'all doing? How's everybody going? So welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. A reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is just intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. So if y'all have a question or concern, please go see a licensed professional. Better lighting, that's part of it. I think the camera is also different. Yeah, I wasn't going to be online today. That was the plan. And so we had actually a window of time, and so we decided that if we've got a little bit of extra time, we'd like to spend it with you. So, yeah. So those of y'all that are, oh wow, subscribed at tier 3, the subscriber for 14 months. Wow, that's, thank you very much, Perfectly Panda. So yeah, we are, yeah, we're just chilling. So I've got some good stuff for today. We're going to be taking a look at a couple of things from the Reddits and the TikToks and stuff like that. I think, you know, we didn't have time to line up an interview or anything like that. So there's just some stuff we're going to talk about today. He doesn't know. What doesn't I know? What don't I know? Who has been the most positive influence in your life, and what did they say to you? What a good question. Let me think about this. What?
Your invisible friend is not a good look.
Oh. Okay. Well, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Ryan says more energy.
More energy. I'm working my way into it. Who is the most positive influence in your life, and what did they do or say to you? That's interesting. So I don't know if this counts. Probably. So I had something like a guru the first time I went to India. So my default answer is probably that. But I remember, in terms of the single thing that someone said to me that changed my life, was a Ayurvedic physician explaining to me how Vata worked. And specifically that I'm not the kind of person who is going to do well if I'm like only focused on one thing. And that in order for me to be successful, what I really need to do is like juggle as many balls as I can without dropping a single one. It revolutionized the way that I looked at my life. So like I was just trying to be like everyone else instead of playing to my strengths. And so learned so many things like that concept, right? So many of us are given this formula for success. Like that's what we're told. Like, oh, like if you want to be successful, like study hard in high school and go to a good college and then go to graduate school, or like quit college, drop out of college to join a startup or start a company and like, you know, do microfinance. And nowadays it's NFTs and shit coins and this kind of stuff, right? Like everyone has this like avenue, this secret to success, the formula to success. They're all different, right? So there's everything from the here in my garage dude to like the traditional Harvard MBA, you know, executive kind of route. But the point is that like people have formulas. And so what I really learned from that is that like, first of all, you can't follow a formula because a formula that worked for any person depends on that person's strengths, personality, preferences, weaknesses, etc. So there isn't a formula that works. That actually what you really need to do is understand who you are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and then craft a life based on that. So that was huge. The trick to work in crypto is to not buy crypto. So it seems, right? So there's another formula. And then there's someone else who's like, yeah, I bought Dogecoin before Elon Musk tweeted about it, and I sold the day after he tweeted about it. And so my trick to succeed in crypto is to try to predict Elon Musk's tweets. Oh, yeah, we're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Someone's asking me with VX Sios is asking Amber Heard borderline abuse breakdown. I haven't been following many details, but we're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Right. So one thing that I did like about that is that I don't know the details, but I think the person who testified about some of that stuff had actually spent time with Amber Heard, which I think is like really good, hopefully. So I think that there's you know, sometimes we'll get people who comment about like mental illness or personality things or things like that who have not actually spent time with people. So I think the American Psychiatric Association has a ethical rule against that. Interestingly enough, I don't think the American Psychological Association does. So sometimes you'll have psychologists who will like, you know, kind of like analyze people without ever having spoken to them. And because it makes for good content, right? Like people read that sort of thing. So the one thing that I do think is good about that, I'm not saying that that diagnosis is accurate or appropriate or what it means. I haven't looked at it in detail. We could potentially look over that. We could do like a react sort of video if y'all wanted to, where we sort of talk about it, and look at it and share some thoughts about it. But generally speaking, I try not to comment, you know, because it doesn't, that's not our general approach, right? So we'll comment about general things, but when it comes to an individual human being, like we prefer to talk to them so that we can really get high quality information and not form unfair judgments. So yeah, I mean, I feel like so part of the reason that I want to steer clear of like the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard stuff is because it feels kind of predatory, right? Like there's a media frenzy right now. So my instinct, I'm not saying this is correct or not, but like my instinct is like, you know, like I have no idea what the experience of these two people's lives are in this moment. Right. And like, I think we as a society are so quick to just like, once someone is a celebrity, like fuck their feelings, right? Like we're going to alter them up on, we're going to put them up on the altar of sacrifice for our drama and enjoyment, which is sort of, I guess, the price they pay for being a celebrity, but that's not really great. That being said, you know, the flip side of it is that hopefully I have heard from some of my colleagues actually that the psychologist who testified did an amazing job in terms of like educating about some of these things. So in that sense, I think like ultimately what we try to think about is not just what's going to get us views, but is there something that we can gain from this? Can we learn something? Can we understand ourselves better? That's really what our compass is. Yeah, no, I mean, celebrities have feelings, and oftentimes I think we grossly underestimate what our negative impact is on them, right? So we sometimes think that because they're successful and famous and rich, that means that somehow like counters the toxicity that we send their way. So, was Buddha a yogi? Certainly. I think so. We're going to talk a little bit about meditation. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. So let's jump in. Depth of field change looks nice. Yeah. We've got a good crew here at HG. They're very talented at what they do and very thoughtful. Yeah, so today, let's just talk about what we're going to be talking about on stream today. So we're going to take a look at a couple of posts. So we're going to be looking at how do I stop being hyper independent. Let's just show y'all so we can decide. Okay. So let me see if I can put together. Oh, I think Tech Tellers Tech Teller, I want to do a poll if you're there, bro. And we're going to look at 3 options for today, and then we may go into a 4th. So option number 1 is how do I stop being hyper independent? Option number 2 is meditating on weed cheating. Option number 3 is going to be work-related mental health stuff. So essentially working your job while working on your mental health, while working on your relationships, while working on physical health, while working on your family, while working on sleep habits, while working on self-care, while working on exercise, while working on personal goals while working. Right? So let's put together a poll and see. So this may be a little bit longer because we're going to do a couple of TikTok reacts. So we're just going to try to understand yeah, the wellness treadmill. That's such a good way to put it. Oh my God. Okay, that's so interesting. I thought that people would be the most interested on meditating on weed, but it seems like people are, because that's like a charged subject. The people who smoke the weed really push for saying it's okay, and the people who are the yogis are like, it's bad. But okay, let's talk about mental health and work. Absolutely. Let's get started. So let's take a look at this. There we go. No. Okay. So one of the challenges in life is that you're working your job while working on your mental health, while working on your relationships, while working on physical health, while working on your family, while working on your sleep habits, while working on self-care, while working on exercise, while working on personal goals, while working. Right? So like, I think one of the things that's happened is we've started to realize that a lot of this stuff is work that you need to spend some time on, right? Like you have to devote time to it. So I get the sense that in my parents' generation, no fault of theirs, but people weren't quite as cognizant like about mental health and the fact that mental health needs to be like taken care of, right? So, the concept of seeing a therapist when my dad was my age was like pretty foreign, especially in India, or even like 20 years, when he was like 20 years old, it was like completely foreign. Like they didn't exist in India, or very few of them did. And then the other thing is like when it comes to family and relationships and stuff, that too was sort of like, they just kind of worked themselves out, right? So like when in 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, just to like share a story with y'all. So when I talk to my grandmother now about like relationship stuff, she like shushes me. So she'll be like, oh, like, like there are problems in every marriage. There are problems, these things happen. Like, don't dwell on them. Just, everything will be fine. And there's kind of like this sweep it under the rug mentality. And I realized that like a lot of that sweep it under the rug mentality comes from a social situation in which change is not viable. So like talking about it or complaining about it or things like that were not like really useful interventions. So my grandmother grew up in a time where divorce was like unheard of and economic options were very few and far between, right? So you like get married, you have a joint family unit. The joint family unit, which means that you live with your parents and potentially like siblings or in-laws or whatever. And so you'll have like 10, 12, 14 people living in a single household. And the reason for that is because people were like farmers and you like needed to have shared labor and shared resources and stuff like that. You had your own internal small economy. She grew up in a village that had like 150 people, and you know, going to the next village over, which was like a 3 or 4 hour walk, was like a big deal. So it was like an event, right? It's kind of like for us flying internationally. People would like go, you know, once in the first 20 years of their life. They're like, oh yeah, I went to like that other village. And then oftentimes it'll be for some kind of occasion, like, you know, getting married or something like that. So there just wasn't a whole lot of like viability for changes, divorce, economic freedom, independence. So like talking about family stuff wasn't a thing. Like there was no point in talking about it because you're dealt the hand that you're dealt. The power dynamics are also very, very like are strong, right? So like they're hierarchical. So like if the head of the household doesn't like what you're doing, you don't have any kind of recourse. There's no option B. You're going to have to live there and they don't have to listen to you. So that's sort of like, I think what's happened is that attitude, which may have been quite severe in India, like back in like 1930, 1940, places like that. I don't know exactly what things were like in the US, and not everyone in India lived in that sort of situation, right? So there's heterogeneity there for sure. But I think the big thing is that there wasn't a cognizance that this kind of stuff you work on. Like physical health, maybe people were aware of. You got to kind of take care of your physical health. Don't eat a bunch of sweets, you know, like exercise here and there. And then work too was something that was sort of like handed to you back in the day. And now I think what's happening is we're gaining an awareness as our society changes, as we have upward mobility, as we have lateral mobility, as we have the options to choose our relationships, to a certain degree, choose your work. And also as the stresses of this current society bear down on us, things like sleep and family and mental health are like more under attack, right? So when I was like a farmer 100 years ago, like I wake up when it's time to wake up and I go to bed when it's time to wake up. There's nothing to do. There's like literally like there's no electricity. So like once the sun goes down, like unless other people are willing to socialize, there's like nothing to do. I can't stay up till 4 a.m. doing nothing. There's like literally nothing to do. And so now what we have is we have like entertainment at our fingertips, right? You can stay up all night long if you want to. Like there's plenty to do. You can text people, you can browse Reddit, you can, you know, troll people on Twitter. Like trolling people on Twitter is a 24/7 kind of activity. And so like now we've realized like, oh crap, this stuff needs work. But when do you have time to do it? Right? Because work needs work too. And work is no longer like show up at 9 and leave at 5, like clock in and clock out, right? Everyone wants you to distinguish yourself. You got to be a leader. You got to get promoted, got to get a raise. You can't be content at work. You got to hustle, right? You got to have your hustle at work. You got to have your side hustle. There's hustle and side hustle, right? And so we got to have hustle, got to have side hustle. Got to make your boss happy. Boss now has to make you happy, which we'll see. Right? It's just so much stuff to do. Like, when are you supposed to have time to do this? Like, by the way, there's no entertainment here. You got to work on your relationships, got to work on your family. Set boundaries with them, talk to them, manage their emotions. It's a pandemic. Got to move in with them. Your sibling is like, doesn't respect your boundaries. They're expecting free childcare from you because they decided to have children when you have decided not to have children because you're still focused on your career. But they got pregnant and they're 6 years younger than you are. And now they're losing their weekends. And they're like, I don't understand. Like, I need a break. And it's like, you should have thought about that before you have kids. And then what they do is they start messaging your parents. And then your parents start messaging you. And then like, right? So now you got to work on that. and your sleep is screwed up, and you're drinking too much coffee, and mom is a QAnon, sure, right? So, oh my God, like, don't get me started on, man, I have seen vax and anti-vax philosophies like tear apart families during the pandemic. It's wild. Like you need to get vaccinated because grandpa's got heart failure and is on oxygen already and can't afford to get sick because he's on prednisone. And it's like, I'm not going to get vaccinated because I'm not a sheeple. And then like tears families apart. Right? And then like people say, oh yeah, I'm vaccinated. And they show up at Christmas. They're not vaccinated. They're asymptomatic carriers of COVID. Grandpa gets sick of COVID, dies. And then, oh, it's bad. Right? I mean, it's just, so there's just so much to handle right now. And like, I don't know how people are supposed to get a break. Like, I don't know. It's just overwhelming. There's just so much stuff you need to do. I mean, I think that this is where, like, I don't have wild wisdom that is going to make this easy. I think this is the society that we live in, where we're being assaulted on several different sides. Like, we're managing so many things. I think part of the upside, though, to this that's kind of weird is that we're at least aware that these are things that you can work on, right? So, like, people have resources at their disposal for, like, the first time in human history about how to deal with a parent who has borderline personality disorder, how to deal with a child who's narcissistic, how to support a child who has an addiction. Like, all of these kinds of things we have resources for. We have tools for sleep habits, right? We've got melatonin, which you can get over the counter, and we've got, apps that you can download that will help you train your sleep schedule. And we also have things like sleep studies and therapists and CBT for insomnia and all this kind of stuff. We also have all these people who will, tell you how to be successful at your work on YouTube, right? And it's great because we have all these resources. And so surely what that means is everyone is getting promoted, right? Because I watched these 5 videos about how to get promoted, how to make $1 million, how I made my first $1 million in 2 years. And so everyone's walking around with $1 million because look at all these people out there telling us how to do it. And it's so easy. And so sometimes what happens is we're kind of like, we do this sort of stuff, and then we're kind of confused when, like, I'm watching all these YouTube videos and it's not working, right? And then we wind up like this. Because the subtle thing here is that these are all things that I need to work on. Because I have to work on your job, and I have to work on my mental, and I have to work on my physical, and I have to work on my relations, I have to do my family, I have to do this, I have to self-care, exercise, sleep habits, hustle, side hustle, try hustle. Right? Because that's what successful people do. If you want to have a successful marriage, you got to work at it, man. If you want to have a successful career, you got to work at it, man. If you want to exercise properly, you got to work at it, girl. Right? Because we got to do all this stuff. Because here's this person on Instagram telling us how we should exercise. And here's this, doctor on Twitch or neuroscientist who has a podcast who's going to talk about sleep and meditation. And now I got to meditate. She didn't even include this. Meditation is a big one. I got to learn how to meditate. Right? So what do you do about this stuff? The first thing is take a step back, take a big, deep breath, and figure out that or understand a couple of things. You can't work on everything at the same time. It's just impossible. You just really can't. The other thing to understand is that if you work at something, it doesn't take work forever. So generally speaking, the establishment of a habit is the hard part. And once the habit sets in, or once you make some kind of progress, once you learn how to communicate better in a relationship, that carries with you. So everyone wants to do everything by a certain time. And so I'd say let go of that. I want to get married at this age. I'm going to have my first kid at this age. I'm going to get a second kid at this age. I'm going to make this much money. I'm going to retire. We have like this timeline, right? And we think that life is a race. So like somewhere along the way, we got the idea that life is a race. I'm behind. Oh my God, that person is crushing it. They made their first $1 million by 30. This person made their first $1 million by 22, right? Because we have that now with esports and streaming and YouTubers and all this kind of stuff. I remember being at the Twitch Awards. Sorry, not Twitch Awards, the Streamer Awards. And meeting other streamers and like, you know, because like you meet people and then you make small talk. And I was like, you know, hi, my name is Alok. It's nice to meet you. And there's like another streamer there. And they're like, oh my God, I'm such a huge fan. I'm a sophomore in college and I'm studying psychology. And it's like, we're peers, right? It's wild. I think it's great that they're studying psychology. I think it's great that they're a very successful streamer. But somewhere along the way, we start making comparisons and we think that we got to go fast. And if you look at that tweet, what happens is like we're trying to do it all at once. Because society has told us you can't not do this. It makes you a bad person. If you don't work on your relationships, like what kind of human being are you? Oh my God, like if you eat processed food, what kind of human being are you? Right? Like if you don't hustle and side hustle and try hustle and quad hustle, right? Like what kind of human being are you? Like you're not going to be one of the successful humans. There's like the successful humans over here who are crushing it and rocking it and posting stuff on Instagram and like doing all this stuff. Penta hustle. Like I'm going to develop, you know, if we ever decide to do something besides Healthy Gamer, I'm going to develop the Penta hustle machine that both allows you to eat, exercise, meditate, work, and no fap all at the same time. It's going to be this device that you plug yourself into, and it's going to do everything for you all at once. There's going to be a chastity belt. There's going to be a meal tray. We're going to stick in a gastric tube so that you can get ideal nutrition. You don't have to waste time cooking or eating. Because you know what the worst ROI is? Consuming food. And then we're going to do this thing where we have we're going to have 2 IVs running, one with ketamine and one with caffeine. That way we can like reduce our sleep to highly efficient 3 hours a day with biofeedback. And then I'm going to take this device and I'm going to stick it into a sensory deprivation chamber so I can get utter relaxation with VR goggles so I can interact with people in the world. Right? Because this is what's happening. Now we have this like tech hustle culture too. Who are saying, oh, by the way, the solution, I don't know if you guys know, did you guys know this? The solution to this problem is a sensory deprivation infrared sauna. You guys didn't realize that? Right? Like we're gonna, oh, by the way, download our app. It'll help too. It uses science. And look at our board. We have a scientist on there. Because we got to do everything all at once. So here's what's happening, right? We have to do everything all at once. And then society's there. You could talk about capitalism if you want to. But if you're looking to buy something that doesn't exist, someone will make it for you. They're like, oh, you're trying to do everything all at once? Didn't you know that there's this device that improves your meditative efficiency by 88%? Absolutely. We have a scientist on our board. And didn't you know that you would sleep better if you ate organic? Purchase this thing and it will improve your life. Having difficulty with your relationships? Here, let us sell you. I kid you not, I once talked to someone who was having trouble communicating with their child, and they purchased a set of musical tapes that will make their child more emotionally aware and better able to communicate. And they made their kid listen to the tapes. And they were like, I'm confused, like he's not talking to me. And I make him listen to the tapes, and after he's done listening to the tapes, he still doesn't talk to me. Right? So take a step back. Focus on one thing at a time. Recognize that it's okay if your life is a dumpster fire. It's not actually a dumpster fire unless it's a dumpster fire. You may feel like it's a dumpster fire, but when you try to do everything all at once, it feels overwhelming. So take a step back, focus on one damn thing at a time. If you get bored of one thing, focus on 2. You get bored of 2, focus on 3. Don't go past 3. Right? So, okay, this week, I'm going to try to get my job in order. I'm going to try to clean my house, and I'm going to pay my bills. Don't worry about exercise and sleep. Like if you need to eat fast food or frozen pizza, eat fast food and frozen pizza. Don't worry about it. Your heart will be okay for like a week. And then like do them one at a time and put your mind to it, right? Like really focus on one thing. If you want to focus on relationships, then focus on relationships. That's a good one because if you learn communication skills, it'll help you at your job. Right? Cut yourself a break. Focus on like 2 or 3 things at a time. And it's okay to not be perfect. You don't have to be like, life is not actually a race. You don't have to be ahead of the pack. I don't even know where the pack is. Like, you know, I don't know. Like people, you know, half the world is like, not half, but like a third of the world is like literally below the UN poverty line, right? So like you're okay. And if you're below, if you're in that bottom third, then like that's going to take some time to fix. So cut yourself a break is the most important thing. Focus on like a couple things at a time and recognize this is like if they have one bit of wisdom that maybe people haven't heard before, recognize that the way that you feel this way is because society is making you feel this way. That doesn't necessarily mean it's true, right? Because we live in a culture where we're bombarded by like people working on these things constantly. So I see this a lot with people who are like spiritually hungry, where they're like going to this retreat and going to that retreat and going like, I need to be like more in touch with myself. Like I need to understand myself better. Like I need to learn how to forgive. Like I'm like, I really need to learn how to forgive. Like I've been struggling to learn forgiveness for so long. And then I realized like, I can't forgive others unless I forgive myself because I read this book that talks about how forgiving others starts with forgiving yourself. And it's like, bro, if you're beating yourself up for not learning how to forgive, you're like defeating the point. Like, you guys get that? It's like, oh my God, I can't forgive. Like, forgive yourself for that. Why don't you say it's okay not to forgive? And then like mind blown. Right? It's okay to not forgive. That's forgiveness. So like we get into this like cycle without even realizing it. Right? It's like in this like wellness cycle where it's like, oh, I got to work on this. I got to work on this. I got to work on. No, you don't. You don't actually have to work on it, right? You're allowed to be not a perfect child to your parents. You're allowed to tell your parents, you know what? I just don't have the bandwidth for your BS right now. I love you guys. I just need to take a step back. You're allowed to dodge phone calls. You're allowed to do that. Even that, what I just said, requires a certain amount of like self-understanding and being able to communicate. You're allowed to not answer the phone if someone that is stressing you out doesn't, you know, you don't have to answer it right now. Now, if you have some kind of relationship, at some point you don't want to like ghost them, right? You don't want to disappear off the face of the earth. Like send them a text message, let them know you're doing okay, but like you don't have to answer. I just don't have the bandwidth for this right now. So here's the concrete piece of advice. I just don't have the bandwidth for this right now. Right? So like that's something you need to learn to tell other people and learn to tell yourself. It's okay. Just don't have the bandwidth for it right now. That's fine. Right? Questions. That's my wisdom. It's like be aware of what society is doing to you and don't fall for it. Yeah, there we go. So Outfair is saying then I should have more bandwidth. Exactly. Right? So I bet you if someone came up with a product that they claimed turned 24 hours of a day into 26 hours of a day, someone would buy it. Someone was like, we've discovered this supplement that alters the perception of time and speeds up your neurons by 18% and allows you to get 26 hours out of a day instead of 24. Someone would buy that. It's called 420. I like that. So Big Brain Plays is saying limitless. That's the brand. Hey, how y'all doing today? My name is Dr. Kanocha. I'm here from Limitless. We've discovered how to warp the perception of time in our brains and we're allowed to. We've broken the time barrier, and we are now limitless. TM, trademark, dot, limitless dot alive, because we couldn't buy the .com because it's used by another motivational speaker. Right? All right. Questions. I'm funny. What I am is exhausted. Yes, this is great. So Holy Trebus is saying the greatest thing I learned recently was that it's okay to not do anything and lay there like a potato. And that's where, like, it's okay to do that, right? But if that's all you do, maybe not so okay. But it's good. Sometimes you gotta just take a step back. Are you a wife guy, Dr. K? I don't know what that means. Am I married? Yes. Do I like my wife? Yes, absolutely. What to prioritize? The thing that drives you the most insane. Right? Okay, let's keep going. So, let me find out. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this. We're going to do this. Let's see what's next on the work realm.
I don't know when we're finally going to understand that this new generation of workers is not to be played around with. You get what I'm saying? If they don't like a job, they will leave it gone. Vamoose, they will quit so fast. A 2-week notice is just a really funny joke to them at this point. It's an urban legend, right? My friend worked at Baskin Robbins for 2 days, right? And my friend had one specific rule. Do not make fun of Harry Potter, right? His manager said, Harry Potter's stupid. My friend said, say that again and I will quit right now. And the manager called the bluff. He said, Harry Potter's stupid. Guess what my friend did? He got a scoop of mint chocolate chip and then got out of there. The manager had to close by himself. My friend said, I will not be disrespected in the workplace. I'm like, look, what? Right at our job, right? Somebody said, hey, don't schedule me on Mondays. And guess what they did? Scheduled him on Monday. And guess what happened? He's not working Mondays anymore because he quit expeditiously. He sent me a SpongeBob meme that says, I don't really feel like it. That's the workplace nowadays. Respect your workers, please. I don't know when we're finally going.
So there are some things about this that I love and some things about this that you got to be super careful about. So the first thing is that I think a lot of the problems in the workplace have happened because there have not been feedback mechanisms and power dynamics that have mattered. So let me just rephrase that. So the reason that this stuff persists is because there's no like evolutionary pressure against it. So if we think about the theory of evolution, there's like natural selection, right? Which creates pressures that reward certain kinds of behaviors or select for certain kinds of behaviors, and then, negatively select for other kinds of behaviors. And what we've seen in the workplace for a very long time is no selection pressure. And so when there's no selection pressure, bad behaviors have started to propagate because there's nothing keeping them in check. So you'll have these bosses that sort of like will lord their power. They're petty tyrants over their employees. And so if an employee says like, don't make fun of Harry Potter, instead of the boss being like a decent human being, the boss is like, I can make fun of Harry Potter and there's nothing you can do about it. And furthermore, what you're telling me is a challenge to my ego because I'm the boss and you're the employee, and I don't think you understand how this relationship works. You don't tell me what to do, I tell you what to do. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you right now because I'm going to make fun of Harry Potter again, and then let's see what you do. And generally speaking, that kind of behavior was fine because there was no selection pressure against it, right? So if you look at like, curliness versus straightness of human hair, to my knowledge, the reason that we have both is because there's no clear selection pressure for one versus the other. So there are all kinds of attributes where you'll see like no selection pressure. So it's kind of like all sorts of random stuff. So sometimes you get a good boss, sometimes you get a bad boss, but the bad bosses essentially aren't punished. There's no problem with it, right? And this is where you see things like this on TikTok where now workers, the power dynamic between workers and employers is changing some. So you're sort of starting to see people like recognize that if I go somewhere else, like I actually don't need this job. So I am able to find a job that pays as much as you pay me, and I don't have to deal with your toxic ass. So people are leaving. So this is also creating all kinds of interesting things in the workplace where, you know, like as people are shifting around a lot, and we've known this for a while, that like moving jobs on a semi-regular basis is on average the best strategy to maximize your income. Not just staying at one place over time, on average. But then you've got to be a little bit careful because there are exceptions. I mean, it's not really a rule, it's just on average. Whereas there are some employers that, you know, sticking with one place for an extended period of time can be very good. And moving around a lot will actually be worse. So you got to be careful about some of those truisms, right? Because it's an average. It's not, may not apply to even 50% of people. So we'll see things like this. And then the other thing that's happening is the internet is sharing these kinds of stories. And the reason that these stories do so well is because they validate and we feel vindicated because we've been in that position, right? Where it's like, oh my God, like it's like that, the justice boner that I get when I listen to that. Oh my God, I remember I had that boss who's toxic to me and like, I should have done that. It's great. We see this a lot actually in medicine. So like, this is where like, you know, during the pandemic, nursing was stressed to a whole different level. So nurses were dealing with an unparalleled amount of work, an unparalleled amount of toxicity of people in the ICU. I have friends that are ICU nurses that like, you know, their family comes in, someone's dying of COVID and is on a ventilator, and family is like, they don't have COVID. COVID is a hoax. Y'all are crazy. Tries to get bleach or ivermectin or like whatever other kind of like stuff. And the doctors are like, that doesn't work. And they're like, first of all, they don't have COVID. Second of all, ivermectin is the best treatment for COVID. Third of all, I don't care about your medical degree. I brought him to the hospital because I don't believe in what you do. And they're on the ventilator because you guys are completely clueless. And then it's like just so damn confusing, right? It's like, if you don't believe in medicine, like, why are you here? Well, I don't know. If you don't believe in COVID, why are you wanting to give him ivermectin to treat COVID? There's just like, and the nurses, poor nurses are on the front line of this stuff. They have to deal with this stuff day in and day out. So they start getting burnt out. Then what happens is everyone calls them heroes. It's like the nurses aren't heroes. They're sacrifices. Right? So like it's great to call the cannon fodder on the front lines. Like it's great to call them heroes. Like that's wonderful. Like let's call them heroes. Like we really appreciate the work you do. Good job. Are you going to pay us more? No. In fact, there's some weird contraction of certain kinds of services during the pandemic, right? So elective surgeries, for example, pay a lot, but we had to stop elective surgeries because everyone's dying of COVID. So we're getting money from the government. Nurses are maybe getting some kind of hazard pay, maybe not. And then what nurses realize is that some places are stressed, okay? And like they're like, we desperately need nurses because we have 1,000 patients and we have 1,000 nurses, and that doesn't work. So then we started seeing like travel pay increase. So then nurses realized like, okay, I'm making, let's say $80,000 a year here, and I can be a travel nurse and get paid 3 times as much. So like I know nurses that made $300,000 in the US during the pandemic. And that's because they were travel nurses. And then like employers get super upset because all their nurses are leaving because some places are starting to pay like ridiculous amounts of money. You even see legislation getting passed in places like Texas where it now becomes illegal to be a travel nurse. You can't leave anymore. You can't accept a job in another state, which is like, wow. You also see this with residents, right? So medical residents, for those of you that don't know, like we basically are like indentured servants. So I once calculated that when I was in residency my first year, I got paid something like $3 an hour or something like that. You know, I don't know. Let me see if I can make a quick calculation. let's say 80 hours a week, working 49 weeks a year. Yeah, some small amount. I don't know exactly what it was. And so what happens is in residency, like you have no option to move. So you sign like a 4-year contract. And if you don't like it, like you just can't find a job somewhere else. So part of the reason that residents get paid very little and like don't really advocate for themselves because they can't. They have no negotiating power. And so what's happening now is like people are starting to have negotiating power. And so people are leaving. And like now we're going to see a selection pressure on managers, which I think is a good thing. Because now managers like have a choice. Either you can be an asshole manager or you can be a good manager. And then the next thing, and this is the thing, so I think like all this stuff is good because there hasn't been selection pressure that has allowed managers to be essentially like bad human beings and like not treat their employees with respect. The downside, the real downside that I've seen with this is that sometimes you get employees that don't recognize when they actually have a decent manager. So they get so riled up by this stuff, this emotional stuff, right? You feel victimized, but you may not really realize that your manager, because there's like cognitive bias here, right? There's ego. And so you may not realize that like, it's not that your manager is being toxic, it's that you continue to screw up at work and they're actually trying to help you. And so the third time that they bring you into their office and talk to you about it, you feel disrespected. And then like, you're like, F this, I'm out the door. And this is the other problem with these kinds of TikToks is this person is sort of saying like, you know, employees aren't putting up with it anymore. But like, what happened to the dude who quit? Like what happened to the dude who quit when someone made fun of Harry Potter? And this is what like concerns me, right? Is if you're like, I can sort of like, I can get the sort of sense of social justice there. And it's like, if people are going to deliberately disrespect you, that sounds like a toxic work environment. You should probably leave. On the other hand, if you quit a job because someone makes fun of Harry Potter, like what does that mean for your future? Does that just mean that any place where someone wants to criticize Harry Potter, you're not going to work there? Like what if they just have a valid criticism of Harry Potter and it has nothing to do with trying to, you know, create some kind of power dynamic to disrespect you and put you in your place? Right? So, because that's the way that these things are framed. Right? Is like the boss like looked at me and they're like, Harry Potter sucks. And it's, you know, I don't doubt that the person who was on the receiving end of that felt that that's what's going on, but that may not have been what was going on. Right? So like maybe what's going on is the person, your boss just doesn't like Harry Potter and like what? They're not allowed to make entertainment choice criticisms? Like, oh, I dislike The Wire. Say that one more time and I quit. What, bro? I don't like The Wire. I'm out of here. It's like, hold on a second. Is that what we're really talking about? Because I can absolutely see the first scenario happening, which we talked about, because I've seen that, where you have petty power struggles from managers that are like trying to put you in their place because they have a big ass ego and like want to show you who's boss. And should you quit in that situation? Absolutely. Teach them a fucking lesson. But what we're also seeing is people who are completely intolerant and are like quitting jobs at the drop of a hat. And I just don't know what their employment prospects are. Like for the person who quits, like do they pay their mortgage at the end of the month? Do they have a mortgage? Like what are their personal relationships like? Are they, you know, like we see this, right? We see this on like places like Tinder and Bumble and dating sites where it's like refuse to date anyone who does not love Harry Potter. You need to be this tall, make this much money, and have to love Harry Potter. By the way, you can't just love Harry Potter. You have to be a Gryffindor or a Ravenclaw. No Hufflepuffs, no Slytherins. And so what does that mean for that person? So this is like this is what I think is the problem with sort of like these kinds of TikToks is like I can get behind them. I absolutely can, because there are power dynamics in workplaces. There are power dynamics that have gone unchecked for far too long. And sometimes when your ego gets out of whack as an employee and you think that someone is intentionally disrespecting you, whereas like, let's remember in the grand scheme of human communication, sometimes people don't intend to hurt you in any way. Sometimes you're sensitive and sometimes like conflict resolution instead of grabbing a cup of mint chocolate chip ice cream and walking out the door is like a healthier long-term strategy. Right? I'm not saying that it doesn't feel good, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, like, be careful if that's your default. Right? Like, oh, like, what's better, tacos or burgers? If you say tacos, I'm a quit. It's like, okay. So be careful. You know? I'll share a link. So what do y'all think about that? Okay, next one. This is good. Let's watch that one more time. So I think this is also like a great example of what we're seeing in sort of like the corporate wellness and corporate mental health space. Is so everyone's like, we got to focus on wellness. But the problem that I see is that wellness is like the tack on feature, right? It's like, I'm going to make a single player game and then I'm going to tack on multiplayer functionality. That's different from making a multiplayer game. So we see this a lot also, like even in the, you know, I kind of learned this very well at the Game Developers Conference a couple weeks ago, where it's like, you know, people will, like, game developers are now thinking about, okay, we want like positive communities, right? But they sort of say that at the end. And they're kind of saying like, oh, like we need more positivity in our community. When it comes to the game design, microtransactions are critical in the design of the game. We want to make a game that is so microtransaction friendly, that is built on microtransactions. So the design happens early on, right? We want to make a great game. By the way, let's include microtransactions. Where are the microtransactions? Where's the subscription? Where's the battle pass? You know, how are we gonna monetize this? And then towards the end, 90% through, you've made your game, you figured out how you're gonna charge your player base, you figured out you're going to customize armor and sell cosmetics and this kind of stuff. By the way, when we're developing character models, we need to easily be able to swap out cosmetics. That's a core functionality that we need to think about at the beginning of the game. And when it comes to like positive communities, they're like, we're seeing all this stuff about toxic work environments and like toxic gaming communities. And there's the female gamer market that we want to tap into. So we need some kind of like, let's tack on some positivity at the end. So they go to these developers and they're like, hey, we need some online positive community kind of stuff. And so the developers are like, okay, like we tack it on as an afterthought. So we don't really think about community as a core feature of the game. We think about it as something that we tack on. Now, there are games that think about core community as core features of the game. So the best example of this is like the development of the massively multiplayer online RPG. Because community is a huge part of that. What would an RPG be like if it was massively multiplayer? Not just a multiplayer RPG like Baldur's Gate 2, where each person can control one character, but one person can control all the characters. But if you have a game that is designed for being multiplayer, a game where if you want to beat the last boss, you have to find 39 other people and cooperate with them in a substantial and meaningful way. So that's awesome, right? So that's community that is built into the design. And what we see right now in like work environments and corporate environments, I say this as someone who's like a consultant for these people, right? So sometimes they'll call me in, less so nowadays, maybe on the upswing a little bit. But then like a couple of years ago before HE was a big thing, this is what I used to do for people. So I ran a program that trained 650 people in resilience skills a year. And so then I started working with companies and they'd be like, hey, we want like a wellness program. So I'd be like, cool, like let's build you a wellness program. And so what they tend to do is they call an outside consultant who then makes recommendations. And they'll go to people like HR. And this isn't HR's fault. This is just like what HR is tasked to do, right? So your CEO goes to HR and says, hey, people are complaining about burnout. We need to do something about it. And then the HR person does their job, right? They look at what's out there. They read some scientific papers. They like look at industry stuff and they're like, oh, meditation helps reduce burnout. Let's get everyone a subscription to a meditation app. Let's get everyone like access to an EAP, employee assistant programs. Those are good. I'm not, they're not wrong. But they're also like tacked on, right? And then what happens is like boxes checked. We're done. So CEO goes to HR and says, hey, we need a solution for burnout. HR is like, this is what Google and Microsoft and these other companies are doing. They have meditation stuff. We can get a subscription to a meditation app. We'll tell all employees to meditate. We'll give them a food stipend, which can be valuable, right? We're going to buy them a Starbucks gift card. And we're set. Because when it comes to the design of the job, like wellness isn't really considered, right? Because like 401k, no, that costs too much money. Or like working 5 days a week. Work from home is a great example of this. Where it's like, what's the cost of working from home? This is like what's terrifying for people. Or by people, I mean like managers and CEOs and commercial real estate building owners. Right? It's like, we got to get people back in the office but no one's been in the office. It's not like the world ground to a halt. The stuff that ground to a halt because of COVID. But you have a lot of like, no accountants stopped working because of COVID. Like consultants kept working, investment bankers kept working. There was plenty of stuff going on in distressed investing. Like people kept working. Like even people moved to like telemedicine. Right? And so now it's like that's great for wellness because I just have to get my work done. I don't have to spend 45 minutes driving to work, 45 minutes coming back from work. Like work from home is the worst wellness initiative. Is the best wellness initiative that's ever happened. Because it actually makes a substantial impact in people's lives. And it's not tacked on. So what I tend to see with companies that I work with, people that I work with who are at companies, is that if you really want to tackle wellness, like things like employee assistance programs, even Starbucks with gift cards, like there are places that, you'll see this as well, like on the internet, like this place, my workplace charges me 50 cents for every cup of coffee. That certainly doesn't help. And on the flip side, we're going to give you a Starbucks gift card. It doesn't feel like it's enough, which sort of makes sense because it's not enough. It's something, but it's not enough. And so this is something that we're seeing a lot where people are not thinking about wellness from the get-go. It's not baked into how you do work. How we do work is already established. We're going to do as many mergers and acquisitions as we can this year. We're going to do a lot of deals. We're going to do big deals. People don't think about mental wellness as like a resource that gets depleted. So we think about financial capital, right? We think about how much money do we have to spend. We think about things like space as capital as well. Like how big of an office do we need? Can we afford to use this space for this kind of thing? We think about time as a resource. How many hours can we work, sort of, right? Or like how many deals can we get done? But then the problem is that when it comes to like human wellness, like how many deals we can pack into one team, we don't think about what that's going to do to the team. And we see this a lot in the tech industry. So crunch has become a norm, right? And what happened is crunch used to be something that happened every now and then. Like not every now and then, like it happened every year. There's going to be crunch before a big launch. But then what happened is crunch started happening like more and more and more and more. And the people at the top stopped caring about crunch, right? They're like, it gets done. This game needs to release on this date. This is our launch. We need the revenue. We need this. We have investors. We have shareholders. It needs to launch on this date. And you do whatever you need to get it done. I don't care. The good news is that there are a lot of good employers out there. Like I've met a ton of people, senior software developers, things like that, who genuinely care about their employees. Right? We even had an interview a couple weeks ago where like someone's boss is like, bro, you're working too much. You don't need to do this on the weekend. Like, stop. Right? You do have employers who care. You have managers who care. Like they're absolutely out there, and they're not like rare. They're not like purple unicorns. They're like out there for sure. I don't even want to say close to 50%. I have no idea where that number is coming from, but there are a lot of decent people out there. You know, and just think about yourself for a second. Like, what do you prioritize with the people that you work with? Do you actually care about them? The problem is that that caring is not built into the structure of work. Right? So like good examples of this are like the 40-hour work week, which now like some countries are piloting a 4-day work week. And even if you work once again with nurses, I talked to nurses. So a lot of nurses in Massachusetts are unionized, and a full-time nursing job is, I think, actually just 32 hours of work per week. That's considered full-time. And so what they'll do is like, they'll work 4 8s or like 32 or 36 or something like that. It's less than 40. So they have like the option of like, if they have to work 36 hours, they'll work like 4 8-hour days and 1 4-hour shift. Or what they'll do is work 3 12s. So they'll work 12 hours a day, 3 days a week. And that's considered a full-time job. So that's like a good example of how like you can modify timing and still get a productive amount of work, like a proper amount of work in, but like be so much better in terms of people's like wellness and their family and stuff like that. Right? Because some people have kids, and it's like, I'm a nurse, I'm married to a nurse, I work 3 days a week, I work 3 12s, my husband works 3 12s, we're fine. Right? So I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, he works Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it's fine. Right? But the problem is that we don't think about this during the actual conception of work. We don't think about our workers' wellness and energy when we're designing a job. And so this is what's going to happen, right? We just get stuff tacked on. And I don't think it needs to be like this. The thing that's the real tragedy here is that I think employers can actually do a lot better without making gigantic financial sacrifices, because ultimately like what they see is like some kind of heavy financial problem. Because if there's a problem that you don't really think about from start to finish, one solution that you're going to end up with is throwing money at it. So it's just kind of like that's the default solution, whereas you don't need to throw money at it. You just need to think about it ahead of time and actually make organizational changes that are efficient, which is absolutely possible. We just need to focus on it some. Questions? Does that make sense to people? Because I think it's not going to work as long as we're just tacking on wellness. So you're saying it's really a systemic issue? Absolutely. This is an easy question. How do you make middle managers good people? Very easy. The first thing that you do is you, in your recruitment process, look for good people. So right now, if you think about what goes on a resume, all that goes on a resume is results, right? So this is where like I've worked with a lot of people who, have started to ask questions or started to look for people, like even people who are high up at very prestigious institutions. They'll start to try to get a sense of like, how does this person work with their employees? What are what's your relationship like with them? How did you get these results? What did it cost the people under you to get these results? But everyone's focused on results. No one's focused on the cost of results. That's number one. So just pay attention to it. Number two is you reward them for being good managers, right? So this is something that I had to sort of make this argument, and it was a really easy argument to make. So I was working for a financial institution, and I was trying to explain to them that they need to treat their employees better. It's like, your employees are burnt out, like that. Y'all need to do more about that, like significantly. And then they were like, no, we don't. right? So I asked them, I was like, what's the cost of burnt out employees? Well, there isn't one. Like they either do the work or they don't do the work and they get fired. Oh, interesting. Okay. So is getting fired the only reason that people leave? Oh, no. Like a lot of times people leave. Like we've got, sometimes people leave because they think they have better opportunities. Oh, interesting. What percentage of people leave? Oh, like last year we had one person, really solid performer, rising star, he left. That one hurt. Oh, interesting. How many people do you have to leave? What's the cost of people leaving? What's the cost of turnover? The cost of turnover is high. Now we have to get a new person. We have to train them up. Like a lot of the good ones leave. Interesting. Why is that? Well, people just offer them more money. How do you know that? Well, because that's how it works. It's like, okay, let's try talking to them. When you try talking to them, what you find is that, money's important. But for a lot of people who want to do good work, they'd be willing, and you think about it yourself. I don't know how much money you make if you're watching this, but think about the worst boss that you've ever had and think about the best boss that you've ever had. And would you take a 10% cut in your pay to trade the worst boss in the world for the best boss in the world? And generally speaking, human beings are okay with, not maximizing the most money if there's like a good work environment. Easy, right? People are saying yes, absolutely. So Google figured this out when they started paying their developers slightly less than market rates, but treating them well. So it was like, I remember back in the day, the Google cafeteria was like a mythical place that if you knew someone at Google and they could take you as a guest and Google wouldn't charge them a fucking penny. Brilliant, right? I'm going to take you to this awesome cafeteria because you're my friend. This is the privilege of being friends with me because I work at Google. That's awesome. I have access to this sweet thing that isn't going to cost you a penny, is going to be the best food that you're going to eat today. And it's free. They treat people right. Right? And then you say, but Google pays 35% more than most employers in my profession. Yeah. So compared to some other companies, they had started paying a little bit less. And this is my whole point, is that you can pay 35% above average and treat your employees well. And how the hell does that work? How is that financially possible? It's because, get ready for it. I know this is going to sound kind of weird. It's going to sound weird. When you have happy employees who enjoy coming to work and enjoy doing a good job, when they receive praise, when they receive reward, when they receive feedback, when you give them opportunities to grow, when you give them opportunities to learn new things, they will actually outproduce the shit out of a burnt out, crusty, fried employee. And you will make 100% more than your competitor, and then you can afford to pay your employees 35% more. This is what employees don't understand. So they try to here's a Starbucks gift card and a meditation app subscription. They don't understand that they're shooting themselves in the foot. And you see this, right? You see this with places like Doctors Without Borders, where people come there and they work based on a mission. And then what's the best is that so this is the other thing that some companies learn how to do, is that if someone's mission oriented, then that means we can pay them less. So we're going to take advantage of this. And this is what sucks about a lot of the medical profession. The worst, though, is the teaching profession, at least in the US, where we take your desire to give kids a positive experience and we're going to pay you crap. Because we know we can take advantage of your desire to make the world a better place. It's bad. It's really bad in teaching. The wild thing is that you don't have to. You don't even have to. This is where thankfully we live in a world where 1 + 1 = 3. So this is where some of the stuff about capitalism I don't entirely agree with. I'm not an expert in economics, but I do believe that when human beings come together and work together, they actually generate more value than either one can generate on their own. And I think that's where the extra money comes from. It's not every dollar that someone else makes is a dollar that I'm not making. It's you and I, 1 + 1 can actually equal 3. we can come together and outperform like what either of us could do on our own. And so this is the wild thing, is that if you get people who are driven and you treat them well, like they will do amazing work. And this is what we see about, I mean, you know, we've seen this some, like we see it in our community, we see it in our team. Like you guys look at this setup and maybe they disagree, maybe they think they're being treated poorly, but you know, like that, we try to treat them well. And I think they do a phenomenal job. Like the people who work here are awesome and we try to do the best that we can by them. And it's possible. I've seen tons of companies do it. Like hopefully y'all have had good jobs where people treat you right. Right? And it's like, we're not going to nickel and dime stuff. It's like, you know, you're coming here to work, like eat whatever you want to for lunch. Don't worry about it. And maybe they just don't tell me, right? So maybe I'm blind to it. So this is the kind of thing where I think if you're an employer, like think about this. Think about the way that you treat your employees. Recognize that wellness is not something that is tacked on at the end. Wellness is something that is baked into the structure of a job. And it's as simple as, you know, not all work is the same for all people. So this is like a huge revelation. So you can have two people in the same job that have the same roles, but what they like doing is different. So you can just manage that differently. Right? So there's like, not going to go into too much detail, but this is also where sometimes, like, so especially in like residency, for example. So residency in the medical culture is one where you've got people under you, right? So you have the attending who's at the top. They've got a resident who does the worst work. And then the resident passes on the worst work to the intern. Some of that work the intern has, they pass on to the medical student if they're competent enough to do it. So we have a saying in medicine that shit rolls downhill. So I thankfully trained at a place where that was not the case. And what my superiors did is take the worst work from me. And they were like, you know what? I can see you don't like doing this. Like you should go home. You've had a long day. I will stay late and I'm your boss. And there are some attendings who do that and some attendings who don't. Right? And so then like I learned, I was like, oh, wow, like I should ask people what part of their job do they enjoy and what part of their job do they not enjoy. Okay, you don't like doing this particular thing, then I will do it. So this is the thing about leadership, is that everything is your responsibility. But what we tend to find is that people will pass off the worst work to people beneath them due to a power dynamic. Whereas I was lucky enough to have people who like tanked it, right? And that's what you can also do. Like the worst work doesn't have to go downhill. You know, like if you're a manager, like you can unclog a toilet just like a junior person can. And so I think that it's absolutely possible to create a healthy work environment. It's just, you have to think about it, right? You have to really think about what do we reward people for? What do we care about? What do we prioritize? You know, another just random example of this before I move on is sometimes when I'm doing something, I don't do like couples counseling much, but when I do couples counseling, one member, so I'll teach people how to listen and validate, right? So I'll say like, you know, if your spouse is having a hard day or they're complaining about you not doing something, you know, you can validate that. You can say, yeah, I can totally see how it's like frustrating when I just let the trash overflow instead of taking it out, right? Because then you have to clean it up. Like I just toss it in, it bounces out of the trash can, ends up on the floor, and then you end up picking it up. That sounds incredibly frustrating. That's so hard for people to do because in couples counseling, it's like, but then I'm wrong and they're right. And I can't have that, right? There's sort of this idea that like you can't give an inch in couples counseling. Because if you admit anything, if you validate their perspective, if you understand their perspective, that means that they're right. And if they're right, that means you're wrong. And we cannot have that. And so sometimes a marriage becomes a competition between one person being right and one person being wrong. And so the only way you can have a winner in that relationship is to have a loser. And we see this with employment as well, where it's like, if I let my employees work from home, they're going to slack off and I will lose. This is the basic problem with work environments nowadays, is that there's become an antagonistic relationship between workers and employers. And the employer has started to think any inch I get, like if I give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And employees feel this too, where it's like, if I give them an inch, they'll take a mile. People have stopped caring about each other. There's been like a loss of collaboration and an increase in antagonism. The cool thing is that when you do reflective listening and you validate your partner in a marriage, both of you win. It doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. It just means that you understand. Right? And then this is the flip side of the equation, which is like then your partner says, yeah, I can understand when you've worked 85 hours a week and you're at home, you just don't have the mental bandwidth to think about whether the trash is like full or not. You have so many things on your plate. It's frustrating for me when you don't think about it, but I can totally get how like you're juggling so many things in your head and your dad is in the ICU with COVID and your mom doesn't believe in COVID. I can understand. Oh my God, there's a second side to the story. Right? And then like both of y'all are going to feel better about it. And it's not about right or wrong. And that's what we see when it comes to like reducing burnout in the workplace is like, you're going to reduce your turnover. You're going to increase your productivity. Like happy employees are more productive employees. Like that's not rocket science. Right? And but people don't realize that. They're like, oh my God, like I'll lose something. If they're working from home, they're going to be lazy. Like, yeah, they're going to be lazy. You make that sound like a bad thing. The question is, do they do their work? Right? Like you can be lazy. Like you can get out of bed at 10 a.m. and roll into your meeting at 10:30. But then like you'll still get your work done. All right, enough of a rant. Okay, questions. So someone saying the unvaxxed deserve their fate. We don't believe that in medicine. Right? So this is important. This is what I'm happy about my profession about. We may do a lot of things bad. This is what I'm happy about. Is that we tend to generally say that it doesn't matter what your choices are. We're going to try to do the best for you, right? You don't get someone who's got a bunch of cardiac risk factors, smoked 2 packs a day, comes in with a heart attack, and we say, lol, noob, you haven't taken care of yourself. We're going to let you die. We don't do that. And I don't think COVID is any different. Now, it's harder to arrive at that conclusion in medicine with COVID. It really is. It's a challenge to stick to that value and that principle. But I think it's important that we do that. It's one of the bedrocks of our foundation. Without that, it's a really slippery slope. Like, and I don't, there's all kinds of stuff like, you drink alcohol. Well, my religion says you shouldn't drink alcohol and you've made a bad choice by not being a part of my religion. And this is the price that you pay. Right? What's wrong with that? Like if we're making judgments about people being responsible for their behavior, so what? Like anyone with an addiction problem is like, screw you. What about prioritizing those who make better decisions when you have to make a choice of saving one life or another? That's very common. But that happens it happens consistently, but thankfully it's the minority of medicine. So the best example of holding people accountable for choices are in things like organ transplants. So this is where I agree with this. So if I have one organ to give, and that organ will last 20 years in one person and will last 1 year in another person, then I think it's better to give it to the person who's going to last 20 years. And I think that's a reasonable, because we don't have enough organs to go around. Right? And that's where things like people think that being anti-vax is it's discrimination against anti-vaxxers. I don't think so. It's not discrimination. It's just odds. So there are people who engage in medical treatment and take their like immunosuppressant medication, and there are people who don't. And people who don't take immunosuppressant medication are much likely to get rejection of the transplanted organ. Their own immune system will destroy it and they'll die within a year. So it's like, okay, we can give it to one person whose body will destroy it within a year, or we can give it to someone whose body won't destroy it in a year. And it has nothing to do with vaccines. It has nothing to do with your political beliefs. And this is where like people seem to miss that point. It's just, it's no different than saying like, yeah, for fun, or like, that's why like substance use is also something that needs to be taken care of ahead of time, right? So people need to get sober before they get organ transplants, or ideally they need to show some movement in that direction. I don't think though that, I think a lot of this stuff is very rare though. And it's not like the transplant panels are, their methodologies, I'm not saying they're perfect, but they're like well established. And we sort of know that works well. It's just people are aware of these kinds of things for the first time now. But this has been going on for like 50 years, or however long transplants have been going on. Okay, let's move on. Okay. We just did the work stuff. Man, it's so late. All right, we're going to talk about... Oh, man. We only have time for one more. Okay, I'll give you all a choice. We can do 2 and skip meditation, or we can do 1 and meditate. What do y'all want to do? Okay, let's do 2. All right. So I was going to do this. I guess I can still do it. So how do I stop being hyper independent? 24M, due to childhood trauma and abuse, I've learned to depend on myself. And by depend on myself, I mean wanting to do everything and anything on my own for myself and those around me. I never want to ask for help. And when I do, I feel some sort of shame. Obviously, this is unhealthy as excessive independence can lead to many problems, which include loneliness, burnout, loss of trust, and love in others. Feeling tired all the time, not being able to feel vulnerable around others, etc. I've always suspected that there's something wrong with the way I think of certain things when it comes down to independence. But now that I'm aware of this trauma response and I'm able to put a name on it, what should my next steps be? I understand that the gist of the advice is just going to be just trust people and watch how not scary it is. But obviously that's easier said than done. I want to pause here for a second and offer some thoughts. So the first thing is like, I really want to commend this person for coming this far. Right? So this is like something that I'm really proud about this community at. Like people are recognizing what's going on in them. They may not be able to fix it yet, but this is like our community is like leveling up. And this post is a prime example of that, where they've recognized, okay, I'm hyper independent. It's leading to these things. So what we used to see a year ago, or even still today, depending on how long people have been in this community, is I'm lonely, I'm burnt out, it's impossible for me to trust. How do I fix my loneliness? Whereas now people are sort of starting to realize, okay, this is because I've learned to depend on myself. This is a consequence of my upbringing. It's an adaptation. But how do I unadapt? Right? And then this is also where we're seeing something that's really interesting, which is that a lot of people will give simple answers. I can't trust anyone. Just learn how to trust. Right? That's what the internet will say. Like, you got to learn how to trust. Trust. It's easier than that. Don't worry. How do I even trust people in the first place? When do I know when I need help? How do I depend on others? How do I deal with others when they let me down? How do I provide help without any strings attached? I sometimes have expectations for others to have my back like I did, but I often feel disappointed. I feel like there are dozens of other questions to ask, but I can't think of them right now. Totally fine, because these are all sufficient and enough and hard enough questions, right? These are fantastic questions. So hard to answer, though. In my head, I don't ever need help. Pain goes away, things get learned on my own, and I can just power through. But I can't tell when I should power through something or just ask for help instead. I can learn stuff by Googling, I can experience stuff by researching and doing it myself. I can have fun on my own, etc. Although that gets lonely and extremely tiring. This especially gets bad in long-term relationships. I just feel like I'm doing all the work as I don't accept much help. I don't know how to even accept help at this point. And I kind of forgot how it feels to fully trust someone and have them help me at a satisfactory level without any feelings of shame or weakness linked to it. I've improved over the years as I've been recognizing my limits. Good job. And how others have their own experiences and unique outlooks. Also good job on situations that would teach me better than a simple Google search. Funny thing is that the Google search might lead to a forum which is filled with people's opinions and thoughts. But I want to improve a lot more. I don't want to be hyper independent anymore. I just want to trust people. I want to be able to let my next girlfriend through that big door I've locked for years. Fantastic post. So let's understand this a little bit, okay? What's going on here? So sometimes we don't really have too many details about it, but I think that's okay. We don't need too many details about it. The person sort of says, due to childhood trauma and abuse, I've learned to depend on myself. Okay? So sometimes we grow up in situations where we lose trust in other people. And the reason we lose trust in other people is because we used to have trust in other people, and then our brain learned that trusting other people is not a good idea. Right? So like when you grow up in an abusive childhood, or not even like overtly abusive, your trust can be let down in subtle ways, even by quote unquote loving or picture perfect parents. Right? This is the kind of thing where, there's all kinds of stuff, like where you can have parents who are very successful and want you to be the best. But when you share with them that you actually don't want to go to medical school and you want to become an artist, they look at you and they sigh and they shake their heads and they're like, oh, I'm so disappointed. I don't understand. You're ruining your life, all this kind of stuff. Like, so like even stuff that, and there's like, I say this because I love you. You just have no idea I have more experience than you do, blah, 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 blah. Like even like good parents can do this. Okay? So then like, you're smart, right? So you figured out, I don't know how to trust people. I don't know how to accept help. And then what happens is, in my head, I don't ever need help. The pain goes away, right? So like in those times where I don't ask for help, it hurts. It's extremely tiring, burnout, right? Because you're doing it all on your own. So that leads to burnout and stuff. But eventually the pain goes away. Like I'm resilient. I'm a survivor. I've thrived. I've grown. I've become self-reflective. I've improved over the years, right? I'm going to learn things on my own and I can power through. Because here's the thing. I've learned that if I depend on other people, I often feel disappointed. But if I depend on myself and I'm hyper independent, I never have to feel the shame or weakness of receiving someone's help. I never have to open myself up to the disappointment and betrayal of trusting someone. So I've got two options in life. I can either be completely independent, hyper independent. I love the phrase. Not rely on a damn soul. Because here's the thing, I can do it, but it sucks. That's the problem, right? It sucks. I hate being lonely. I survive, I even thrive, and I grow, and I improve, but it sucks. And that's absolutely true, right? Like, it's not about capability. It's about loneliness. It's about freedom. It's about not being exhausted all the time. And so then the question is like, what do I do about it? Well, I need to learn how to trust. This is a smart person, right? So even you yourself say, I need to stop being so hyper independent. I need to learn how to trust. If I can trust, if I can accept help, I need to learn how to accept help, right? And the internet will say the same thing. They'll say, just trust people and watch how not scary it is. Like, I know it's going to be scary, but learn how to trust, man. Have faith in humanity, and humanity will accept you, right? Like, and then you learn to trust. Like, you have to put yourself out there. Put yourself out there. That's the only way. You have to open yourself up to the pain. And I'm sure I've said that too. So here's the first thing to understand. when we recognize that we need to attain a goal, the goal is not the action, okay? So this person is saying, like, I figured this out, now what? What do I do? So here's the thing that I just want to explain very simply, okay? So this is like kind of a yogic perspective, but like I think it's true, but we just don't think about this in Western psychology quite as much. Trust is not something you can do. Y'all get that? So people say, just trust. Put yourself out there. Give love a chance. Give it a chance. Let people love you. Trust is not something you can do. It's not a friggin' action. Like, you can't trust people. Like, you can say hi to people. You can, ask someone to pick you up from the airport. But, like, trust is not a verb. Like, I mean, it sort of is I trust you. It is a verb. But it's not an action. Let's put it that way. Right? Like, it's a state of confidence in another human being. It's a state of vulnerability. It is a verb. But it's not something you can do. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, I met these 3 great people at the grocery store, and I trusted them for 3 hours. Like, man, dude, I had the best trust. I had the best, I'm so good. Like, he's a professional truster. Like that, it's not something you can do. Right? It's kind of weird. And this is why when people say just trust, it's like, how? Because it's not something you can do. Okay? And we kind of struggle with that, right? So then, like, this person's like asking, like, what do I do? And the good news is there's a lot of stuff you can do. So this is where oftentimes when we're missing something in our life and we look at that as a goal, like, oh, like, I need to learn how to trust. And it's like way over there. What we're looking at is over there. But we're not like looking like over here. This is where we need to look. We need to look at the first step, not the last step. Because trust is like an emergent property. It's like flight. Like, trust is the distillation of all kinds of other stuff happening. Y'all get that? You don't just do it. It's not like I'm going to do 100 reps of trust today. Like, that's not how it works. Trust is a consequence of a lot of other things happening. And so when you're stuck in this situation of being hyper independent, the question, it's a damn good question, is like, what's this down here? Like, what's the first step? And the answer, in short, is communicate. That's what you can do, right? So let's understand what's going on with this person. I engage in a relationship with someone. There's a lot of tricky stuff going on here, okay? So we're going to try to tunnel down into this. I'm going to try to show this to y'all. How can I provide help without strings attached? So when this person engages in a relationship, they help the other person. The post isn't, I can't help other human beings. I'm a selfish asshole. Post is, I can't accept help, but they do help others. Okay? So when you help someone, you create an expectation. And when you create an expectation, other people disappoint you. Right? So I helped you. So there's an expectation. Like, I picked you up from the airport. You should pick me up from the airport. And then they say, hey, can I give you a ride? And then you say, no, because I don't know how to accept help. And then they don't pick you up with the airport. Next week, you drop them off again. They ask, hey, can I pick you up from the airport? You say no. And then you feel disappointed. Then you feel this is especially bad for long-term relationships because I just feel like I'm doing all the work. You're damn right you're doing all the work. That's the reason you feel that way. But why are you doing all the work? It's because you won't let them do the other half of the work. This is tricky. We'll get to this, okay? So then what happens is we create this expectation in our mind. And then the other problem is we don't communicate that expectation. And then what happens is, like, I don't know if this makes sense, but unless you communicate your expectations to other human beings, it's really not fair to hold them responsible for not living up to them. Right? Like, it's really easy for others to disappoint your expectations when you don't tell them what your expectations are. Like, and that's where a lot of relationships, I know it sounds super basic, but that's not actually how we operate, right? Like, we don't actually tell people, hey, this is what I'm expecting from you. We're not transparent with it. So someone's saying covert contracts? Absolutely. So this is where we see this kind of stuff when like people end up in the friend zone. We're friends. Let me get you flowers for Valentine's Day as a friend. Right? And then the other person is like, wait, are you sure this is just like a friend thing? Like this is kind of giving me weird vibes. And then, no, don't have weird vibes. Anything but that. Don't retreat from me. I'm in love with you. So since I'm in love with you and I see you retreating, no, it's absolutely as a friend. And then we become resentful because we don't tell them what we expect. And then how are we expecting someone else to know what we expect? Are they supposed to be telepathic? It gets twice as bad if you can't accept help, because I'm guessing that part of the reason that it feels like long-term relationships where you're doing all the work is because, first of all, you are doing all the work, so I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not saying it's all in your head. But the question is, how does your behavior and your communication influence you doing all the work? Right? So I have a family member who's a wonderful person. And anytime they see me like doing work, they try to do that work. So I don't know if you guys have family members like this, where it's like, if you're visiting their house and you start taking dishes out of the dishwasher, they're like, no, you sit down, let me do that. And then it's like, oh, okay, so you stop doing it, they're taking out the dishwasher, you start taking out the trash. No, I can take care of the trash, you don't need to bother. And they always want to do the work that you're doing. And it's like, and then if you let them, they feel like they're doing all the work and then they get burnt out because you're not doing anything. Right? Classic mom tactic. Absolutely. Right? And so then they're signing themselves up. Like, it's not wrong that they're doing all the work. It's also not wrong where they're coming from. They're not like a mean person who's an idiot. They care about you. They don't want you to do the work, but then they're going to end up doing all the work. So if you can't accept help, your relationships are going to be one-sided. And then you get mad at your partner because your relationship's one-sided. And oddly enough, I don't blame you for it, but it's a problem of your own creation. And that's what's really tricky, right? Is because if we say it's a problem of your own creation, does that mean I'm blaming you? It's like, sort of, but there's also power there. Because if you have the power to fix it, you also have the power to break it. Like, the power is just the power. It's Shakti, energy. And so this is what's kind of wild is then you feel ashamed and stuff like that. No, it's just you just haven't learned yet, right? It's not your fault, but you absolutely have the power to fix this. But if you have the power to fix it, you also have to accept responsibility for your actions creating the situation. So what do you do at the end of the day? The answer is communicate. So you need to speak. I'm not saying if you can't accept help, don't accept help. If you can't trust, don't force yourself to trust. Because that's going to end up with problems too. I need to learn how to trust. I need to learn how to trust. I need to learn how to trust. Hey, person who I've never met before, come into my house and you can stay as long as you want to. And by the way, this is where I keep all my petty cash. And here's where my wallet is. Oh my God. I've been taken advantage of. You don't want to just blindly start going out there and practicing trust. I mean, I guess you can be interesting, but that's not what I would advocate. What you need to do is actually communicate. Right? So this is where when you're in a long-term relationship and someone tries to help you and you don't want to accept that help, acknowledge it to them and say, hey, I really appreciate you wanting to help, but I really feel like I can handle this on my own. And it makes me feel kind of weird if you help me with this. If you want to, you can even say, it makes me feel a little bit ashamed of myself. And then your partner may be a little bit confused by that and not sure what to do. They may say, you don't need to feel shame. Oh, baby, you don't need to feel ashamed. Oh, that's okay. I'm your significant other. I can take care of it for you. You don't have to feel ashamed when, you can't change a tire and you're a big manly man. And I'm not a manly man and I can change the tire. You don't have to feel ashamed. When I'm bigger than you and stronger than you and can drink you under the table, you don't have to feel ashamed. Right? And so just communicate. Share with your partner that, hey, I recognize that you're offering to help me, but it's really hard for me to accept help. You can even just say that. And then at least you are being authentic in that moment. It's going to help deal with the resentment. right? And then ideally what you can do is get to a conversation where you and your partner sit down, and then this is a relationship problem that the two of you are going to solve together. So if it's hard for you to accept help, I'm really confused about how to help you. And this is where you also want to vocalize the other side, where I feel like I'm doing all the work in the relationship. And then your partner is going to get understandably pissed at you. And they're like, yeah, you are doing all the work in the relationship because you never accept my help. And then they're going to get pissed at you. And that's going to feel bad for a little while. And then y'all are hopefully going to talk through it. And y'all are going to sit down and you're going to acknowledge that I'm resentful for you for a situation in which I am creating and not letting you fix. And I'm blaming you for not fixing an impossible situation. You need to acknowledge that to your partner. And then your partner is going to be like, then what the hell do we do about it? You need to shut the fuck up and accept my help. And then you're going to be like, okay. Because now they're pissed. And then they help you. And then it's going to feel good. It's weird. Right? Because they're not going to let you not accept their help anymore, which is exactly what you want them to do. You want them to swat aside, I can do it myself. You want them to swat it aside. You want them to plow right through that. And I don't care what you think, I'm going to help you because I love you. And you deserve it. And despite all of your feeble protests, no, 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 don't kiss me. Don't kiss me, please. Right? You want to be swept off your feet. And you want them to help you despite all of your protests because that shows that they care. And then you can trust them. Right? It's kind of weird. And if we want to get super like analytical about it, this is where like probably that's what the trauma was. That despite, you know, like there was this weird impossible situation where you felt like you were stuck between a rock and a hard place. And someone maybe created that rock and a hard place and they didn't smash through barriers to come and save you. And so now what you want from a relationship is to fix that problem from the past. We have no idea if that's actually the case. If that resonates with you and you're listening to it, great. If it's an epiphany, fantastic. Chances are it's completely off base. But generally speaking, there is this thing called the repetition compulsion, where we create in our current relationships problems that we try to solve, problems that were not solved properly from past relationships. Okay? So if you're hyper independent, the answer is communicate more than anything else, right? If you're asking, what do I do? Because you can't just start trusting. You can't just like accept people's help. You can try a little bit for sure. That's also where like in terms of accepting people's help, you can also try like accepting small amounts of help for insignificant things or even asking for it, which is another like interesting technique. So sometimes it's easier to ask for things that don't matter as much to you in terms of reducing the shame or weakness. So you can even start by like asking someone that you care about to like grab something from you from a different room if you're sitting down. Or like, you know, can you grab me this while you're up? And just let them do something small for you that doesn't evoke a whole lot of shame or weakness. You can actually practice that a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, it's communicating that, hey, it's hard for me to accept your help, and letting your partner know that. So at least they're aware that this is going on. Because right now what's going on is you have this whole internal cascade in your mind about this relationship, all this stuff that you're doing for them and they're not doing for you, and then you feel alone, you can't talk about it, and you're setting these expectations, you're attaching all the strings to all the things that you do for your partner, and you're not letting them help you, and there's just this mountain of stuff that's growing in your mind. And then you feel let down and disappointed because they can't keep up with that crap, right? Because they're not psychic. And then you feel frustrated with them. You feel frustrated with yourself. You recognize that, oh, if I could trust, this wouldn't be a problem. If I was better, this wouldn't be a problem. You beat yourself up. You feel stuck. You don't know what to do. Then you're burnt out. Then you're alone. And then it's like, you throw your hands up. I don't know what to do. It's just so much easier to do this. Why bother with all that crap? It's going to suck for a while, but the pain will go away. I'll learn on my own. I can just power through. Right? And of course, like, that's not stupid for you to think that way. Like, obviously, like, think about what I'm describing. It's a mess. Why don't you just do it yourself? Right? Easier. So communicate is the answer. Communicate that you can't accept help. Communicate that when you help them and you don't let them help you, that you feel resentful. Communicate that you acknowledge that that puts them in a hard position, an impossible position, and that you're working on it, right? And that you need their help if they can. Can you help me figure this out? And maybe that's going to be weird to ask. But oddly enough, I think that you can ask for their help there. I think you're going to feel less shame. When you own it and when you're authentic, it's going to be there. So just talk about what your expectations are. Let people know what they can do to make you happy or disappoint you in a relationship. Whereas like half of what I see like on these horror stories from online dating is like people are jumping through hoops and like playing games that like they're not even aware of what the rules are. Like I'll see this crap where it's like, oh, you want to meet up sometime? Like, where would you like to go? Ugh. That's pathetic. You don't ask me where I want to go. You pick a place and you take me there. And then you're like, my bad. And you're like, I need someone who's more assertive and can be like, you know, is confident in themselves and not someone who's waffling around and can't decide where to go. Unmatched. And then you're like, and then you match someone else and you're like, hey, I'd like to take you to this place on Tuesday. And you're like, and then what you guys, how dare you? I'm an independent human being who has my thoughts and feelings, and you have the presumption to take me somewhere without even asking me what my preferences are? Like, what the? Unmatched. And it's like, we're playing all these games. Well, like, we don't know the rules. And like, different people have different rules. Right? And for those of y'all saying women, this isn't women. This is also, like, there's a female side of this that's equally frustrating. Hi, how are you? Good, how are you? Oh, what are you into? I'm into anime. Oh, cool, I'm into anime too. Here's my dick pic. What? And then you go up to the next, you talk to the next person, and like, it's like equally confusing. It's like, hey, bitch, here's my dick pic. There's no, hey, how are you? Right? It's, y'all making it about women. It's not about women. This is just like what's happening to people. Right? And then there's even like the, I matched with a person. Here's my dick pic. Like, no, hello. Right? Where it's like, it happens too, where like, you know, women are confusing because men are also like, they don't tell you what they're like, oh yeah, like I'm totally fine for any kind of relationship. I'm open. I'm looking to meet anyone. You know, I'm supportive. I'm an emotionally available man. I'm really great that way. I think like, you know, I think all women are to be treasured, and I respect women and I love women, and I'm treasuring you and I'm loving you, which is why I don't want you to go out or talk to any other men, because you need to be treasured and preserved and cared for. And I'm going to put you on a pedestal, and I'm going to place really unrealistic expectations based on the scarring that my mother did to me about what love is. And I'm going to put all of those expectations on you, and I'm going to expect you to navigate them without ever telling you about them. And therefore, what I'm going to do is, since I don't know how to communicate, I'm going to hold you to standards. And when you don't meet those standards, I'm going to get passive and aggressive, because I talk about being emotionally supportive and emotionally available, but actually that's just BS. And I don't actually ever admit my faults. And I blame them on you, because that's what my mother did to me. Right? Like y'all may want to gender it, which is fair, right? Because I sort of did things that I guess people associate with women, but there's absolutely another side of the story. It's not gender related. There's all kinds of like random crap. Right? And it's like, and I think based on the women that I've talked to, the frustration is just it's like RNG, like dick pic RNG. Like every text message could be a dick pic. Open the loot box. Is it going to be a regular text message, or is it oh, I'm a super nice guy, I respect women. Hey, answer me back. Hey, answer me back. Hey, why aren't you texting me? Hey, expletive, other words that'll get me banned on Twitch or YouTube. Hey, give me a chance. Like, why don't you give me a chance? Like, you know, I'm a good communicator. Hey, communicate. You're a bad communicator because you don't understand what my emotional needs are. And I'm placing all of my emotional needs on this match, which happened 4 hours ago. And now it's 2 a.m. and I don't really acknowledge that you have a job that you have to wake up for and that you could be asleep. But if my emotional needs aren't being met, I blame you for that because I don't care about the fact that you have a life and you have other things going on. I have emotional needs and you don't seem to understand that. Therefore, you are a B word or a C word or whatever kind of word, S word. They're all the words that get tossed out, right? So it's like people are playing games. They're measuring you against standards that you have no idea what they are. And so you're going to disappoint them. So this is where like communicate what your standards are. Communicate what your expectations are. And that's also where like, I guess now we're talking about dating advice, but also like not all at once and right up front, right? I need you to be this. 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 You know, I need you to be 6 feet tall, 6 inches, 6 figures versus I need you to cook. I need you to clean. I need you to respect. I need, you know, sexual gratification whenever I ask for it. Like unrealistic expectations, bombarding people on the internet with them is not gender specific. It happens to both people. It's like, or not just both genders. There's more than 2, whatever. Happens. It's human. So stop doing that, right? So start to communicate your expectations. Recognize that your expectations is not a job application where like people are checking off boxes so that they have the privilege of being your mate. I saw a post recently, I don't know if this was on the HG subreddit, but someone was talking about they feel like, you know, women in their 30s have unrealistic expectations. That's not entirely fair. It's sort of true, but not entirely fair because generally what happens is if you have very stringent expectations that you're not willing to compromise on, you're more likely to be alone. So as you get older, there's all kinds of exceptions to this rule, right? So I don't even know that it's a rule. It may be the minority of people that apply to this. But if you're someone who is not willing to compromise on your expectations, it's going to be harder for you to find a relationship. And then I would assume that generally speaking over time, maybe the older people get, the more likely you are to find people who have very stringent expectations. But who knows? Right? Can the opposite problem exist? Being hyper dependent on others because you can't trust yourself to do anything right? Absolutely. And when that rises to the level of clinical diagnosis, we call that dependent personality disorder. 100%. Right? That's why this is fun. Oh man, so look, I love each and every one of you, but the truth is that life can screw us up in so many different ways. Right? If you take like a piece of, like, let's say I take a piece of glass. There are 1,000 different ways, 10,000 different ways in which that glass can be shattered. And that's what makes life hard because none of us is screwed up exactly the same way as other people are screwed up. That's why it's hard because there isn't actually a formula out there. Even what I'm saying, it may not perfectly apply to the person that I'm even talking to and may apply 10% less to another dozen people, 10% less to another 100 people. So you got to kind of figure it out yourself. The good news is that even though you are individually screwed up in your own individual way, the good news is that there's so many pieces of glass out there and all of us have been shattered that some of us have chunks that look kind of like yours. And so we can learn from each other. We can learn about each other and we can actually get some insight. So not all of us is working from scratch. And that's what this channel is about, right? That we can learn from the challenges of other people. And that actually, even though we're each individuals, this is the cool thing about being human, is that our shared experience actually outweighs what separates us. That even though I can have 1,000 pieces of glass that each get shattered into their own unique pattern, at the end of the day, we're all glass. At the end of the day, when you put us all back together, we all look basically the same. And when it comes to this dating stuff, that's my point. It's not gendered. We want to gender it. We want to say, oh, this is a gender issue. Where it's like each gender may just have their own manifestation of assholery on the internet. You can't make assholery a gender issue. I mean, you can. And maybe there's data to support that one gender is more of an asshole than another gender. I don't know. But in my experience, like, assholery transcends gender. It's a basic human characteristic. It transcends religion. It transcends race. It transcends gender. Right? Okay. All right, you guys want to talk about weed and marijuana or no? Okay. This is going to be good, but it's going to be challenging, okay? All right, let's take a look. Is meditating on weed cheating? I'm fairly new to meditation. It was recommended to me for so long, and when I finally started doing it, being mindful and noting my emotions, that I started to see the benefits. When I do it on weed, it's the most interesting. I just had a very meta experience where I was meditating on meditation. I was observing the state of flow I was in and noted that I am seldom in this state. It's a gift to myself to be able to be still and anchored to the ground. My mind felt elevated, like it was a better version of itself. Like I have so much potential and I barely access it because I've been conditioned by myself that I have to always be thinking. Allowing myself to be free of thoughts is a really compassionate act because it's not easy. Though it harms me, the incessant chatter had become a comfort zone. It's scary to venture out into something new, another part of your mind, but it's also really exciting. So is meditating on weed cheating? What do y'all think? Okay, why don't we do a poll if we have a mod around? In the meantime, I'm going to do something. I'm going to look at a couple of the comments. So one person saying I get distracted way faster. I would rather call it hard mode. ADHD. Weed is the only thing that combats my ADHD. These people talk about ADHD for a while. Most practitioners I've consulted with about this topic usually have the point of view. It's easier to go into a trance-like state while high. When you do it a lot, in the worst case scenario, it can become a crutch. And a mild case one would just find it harder to concentrate. So then people are, there is no cheating with meditation. Cheating is a man-made construct and another attachment, right? So so people kind of have all kinds of different thoughts about this, okay? So the question is meditating on weed cheating? So this is like a really popular topic of discussion. So like there tend to be two camps, right? And people will ask me this question all the time. So there are a lot of people who will talk about the use of substances. Generally speaking, these are substance users. Let's see what we all have to say. Okay, so 67% of people say no, 33% of people say yes, okay? So there's like, let's like think through like what people usually say, and let's try to unpack, is meditation on weed cheating? And what are the factors? What does cheating even mean? Okay? So let's start by what people say. Some people like weed, and they like to meditate. And they like these two things. And it becomes difficult to think that, you know, I have to give one up for the sake of the other. And they also have experiences like this where they tend to smoke weed and they meditate and they feel like a freeing of some kind. They feel less anxious. They have profound insights. So they're like, oh, this definitely helps me. And then you'll have people, it's not just weed, right? So people talk about substances where you even have spiritual traditions like the Native American tradition where they'll use ayahuasca, which the active compound is DMT. And DMT has now been studied and has been shown that people will have meetings with extraterrestrial beings 94% of the time when they use DMT. Right? So there's like clearly meditative or religious spiritual traditions that use these kinds of things. And people really like stuff like psychedelics and weed and stuff. And so they kind of like, you know, they say that, oh, I think that, you know, it's not cheating. It really helps. Okay. On the flip side, you'll have like the yogis and the monks and the spiritual people, right? So you'll have these like people who will say that like basically you shouldn't use weed, that it's a crutch, that you can become dependent on it, that the whole point of meditation is to develop like a grounding within yourself that is not substance dependent, right? That like, this is something like you should meditate with a clear mind. And the point of meditation is to attain a higher state of mind. And the more polluted your mind is, i.e. weed is a pollutant, is the assumption there, the worse it's going to be for you. And that weed is essentially negatively impacting your practice. And there are kind of counter arguments to each of these, right? So for example, we know from scientific studies that using certain substances that are mind altering in nature can actually get some of the benefits of like meditating. And so this is where a lot of the confusion comes in, because then we start talk about, okay, when you say cheating and you say meditation, what do we mean by meditation? What's the goal of meditation? Because here's the thing. So when we meditate and it reduces our anxiety, when we meditate and it gives us clarity about things, when we meditate and it gives us a sense of compassion and connection to other human beings, those are all the benefits of meditation, right? That's why we meditate. Because as we become enlightened, we understand things better, we become better human beings, we chill out a little bit more, we're less plagued by our thoughts. By the way, weed does that, psilocybin does that, ayahuasca does that, MDMA does that. So how can you, because it does those things, right? That's been scientifically shown. They do all kinds of other stuff too, not just those things. And there are all kinds of problems with using these things, these substances. So doesn't that mean that it just enhances? And I sort of get what people are saying, because when I use weed and I meditate, I'm able to have these realizations that people talk about in meditation. They say that the goal of meditation is to be more compassionate and understanding and get out of my head. And when I use weed to meditate, it helps me attain those things. So I think it's okay. And then the flip side is like the crutch argument. Well, then you're using a substance, you're becoming dependent on the substance. What happens if you take the substance away? Are you left, or do you grow afterward? Like, or is it just while you're high? And that's the counter argument that the monks and stuff will make, right? So they'll say like, oh, it's like not a pure meditation. But the data actually shows that you can have a spiritual experience through something like psilocybin that lingers and changes your mind and brain afterward. So which is it? Right? So like, because you can adopt the state and you can feel more connected to other people, right? That's why people like MDMA. And I do think there's a value to the crutch argument, because if you become dependent on a substance to be free of your mind, that's sort of missing the entire point of meditation. The whole point of meditation is that you should be able to carry it around with you. The freedom from your mind, the compassion for other human beings. It shouldn't be dependent on a substance. Because meditation can help, right? It can help calm our thoughts, and so that we can focus on one thing, etc. So I think a lot of this, whether it's cheating or not, depends on what you mean by meditation. What's the goal of meditation? And by the way, the other problem here, let's just acknowledge this for a moment. The other problem here is that the monks have usually never tried weed and will even advertise that fact. And the other problem is that the people who are into drugs usually have not meditated to the level of the monks, right? So they may take a course or use an app or something like that, maybe even go on a retreat, but they have not seen what the heights of meditation for 15 years of practice sitting in a cave in the Himalayas is capable of, right? So no one really understands the other's true perspective. It's just people assuming they understand. So here's what I'd say. It comes down to your definition of meditation, because meditation has changed its meaning over time. As we've westernized the concept of meditation, as we've introduced the word meditation, which if you've watched Dr. K's guide, you'll realize that there's no Sanskrit word for meditation. Buddha literally never used the word meditation because it did not exist in the languages that he spoke. And that's kind of confusing for people who haven't watched Dr. K's guide, but that's because there's several meditative states and practices that all get translated in a very unsophisticated way to the word meditation. And this is what confuses people, because they say, I had a great meditation yesterday. What does that mean? Because we also use meditation like a verb. I meditated for 15 minutes. I'm an accomplished meditator. I'm an expert meditator. I've tried to meditate. It hasn't worked. So let's think about that. I tried to walk and it didn't work. That's not right. Worked is an outcome. It's not an action. So when saying meditation doesn't work for me, what they're talking about is attaining a state of consciousness. A state of consciousness, a state of being, is different from a verb. It's different from an action. The biggest problem with the word meditation is that we use one word for both of these things, which are so fundamentally different. One is an action, one is a state of mind. It's like going to bed and falling asleep. You can't actually go to sleep. It's impossible to go to sleep. You can lay down, you can close your eyes. Those are the actions you can take, and sleep is a state of mind that happens to you. So meditation in its truest form is a happening, not an action. So this kind of comes back to, there are a lot of other changes that have happened to the word meditation. Why do people meditate today? Not for the reasons that they meditated when they studied with the Buddha. It's not the reasons that the Buddha studied. In fact, it's the very opposite of what Buddha did with meditation. People are meditating for, in a sense, all the wrong reasons now. What does that mean? So the first thing is that we meditate for something now. So as science has come along, science has shown us, meditation will reduce your anxiety. It'll improve your compassion. It'll improve your focus. These things are true, right? It does do all those things. And so when I meditate, I'm looking for a particular worldly or external or even internal performance-oriented goal most of the time. I meditate to reduce my anxiety. I meditate to become a more compassionate human being. I meditate to ... And meditating to ... is the exact opposite of why Buddha meditated. He didn't do it to do anything. So here's what I'd say about whether substances are cheating or not cheating. If you are using meditation to go from -1 to 0, substances are fine. I still don't recommend them, but generally speaking, I think they can help. Right? So if you're meditating for the sake of anxiety reduction, you can make, I shouldn't say fine, but I still wouldn't recommend it. But I completely understand where the people who are saying this helps me are coming from, because you're trying to move from -1 to 0. If you're trying to conquer anxiety, we have studies that show that marijuana, for example, can help reduce anxiety. If you're trying to conquer low self-esteem, and that's the reason you're meditating, to learn self-love, there's studies that show that psilocybin may be able to help with that. So if you're moving from -1 to 0, makes sense. Also, if we look at the spiritual traditions, if we look at the tradition of using ayahuasca with Native Americans, for example, aids to spiritual practices tended to be used more heavily in the lay people. So they didn't get used more heavily in the spiritual person. They were used for the lay person. So when I have like a Native American person who's coming to their coming of age ceremony, so like a young man or young woman who's going to their coming of age ceremony, like they're not trained in the spiritual traditions, they use ayahuasca, they find their spirit animal. I don't know anything about Native American history, and what I've been taught has been fictitious and stuff. So if there's any Native Americans out there that can actually educate us about that, that would be awesome. But generally speaking, we look at the use of substances for the whole community. It's not specifically for the people who do the spiritual work, although they'll use it too. But the whole point is that like all you have to do is use ayahuasca, and you don't have to be an experienced meditator. You can just get to a state of mind where you can have some realization. So I think that substances make more sense. Still wouldn't recommend using them. So in fact, I advise against it. But they make more sense in people who are moving from -1 to 0. And this is what gets kind of confusing, is because those people are looking for something different. They're like, how do I calm my mind down? Oh, meditation is to be free of my mind, and if I smoke marijuana, it's easy to be free of my mind. Makes perfect sense. But if you're going from 0 to 1, I think it hurts. So if you are no longer dealing with anxiety, no longer dealing with depression, no longer dealing with that stuff, then I think substances hurt. And let's try to understand that, okay? So I'm going to make an argument for you based on my understanding. So if we take something like marijuana, and ask y'all a couple of questions. What happens to worldly experiences when you're under the influence of marijuana? Right? So when I work with people who use marijuana, one of the things that they tell me is that it like enhances experiences. They enjoy playing video games on it. They enjoy listening to music on it. They enjoy eating food. They enjoy sexual activity. Right? So that it brings you more into the world, but in a completely kind of mindful state, right? So when I sit down and I eat a piece of pizza, for example, like, and I'm thinking about 1,000 different things, I can't be present with the pizza. But when I use marijuana and I eat a piece of pizza, it's just like, man, that pizza fills my existence and I'm able to be like one with the pizza and like all this kind of stuff. It enhances my worldly experience and creates this very present focused state. And so even if you talk about like mindfulness and stuff, right? Mindfulness, the goal is to be like present with the pizza and eat the pizza. So like, isn't that both moving in the same direction? The other thing that I'd ask you is sometimes when you use marijuana, people will have thoughts and revelations. What happens to those thoughts and revelations in the light of day? What happens to those thoughts and revelations when you sober up? You know? So then, like, what's going on there? So you have these thoughts and you think they're profound, but they too are of the mind. Right? Like they're of the mind. So I think what marijuana does is it brings you more into the world. It doesn't actually help you transcend it. But it's confusing because if you really look at what being into the world does, it frees you from a lot of the crap that lets you be in the world. So people think it's sort of a step forward, but it's kind of like the only reason it's a step forward is because you're hovering from -1 to 0, because you can't do that stuff anyway. So it fixes what's broken and then lets you sort of appreciate the world. So it's almost like, you know, if this is basic existence, marijuana moves you more towards the world. And meditation transcends and moves you in this direction. The wild thing is that once you meditate competently enough, you go back down over here. And then you can enjoy the pizza, I don't know, in the same way, but like similarly to, then you kind of get to a shared state. But I think the way that you get there is like very different. That's the best that I can describe it. Now, the challenge is that like, I don't think that people who use marijuana develop siddhis. Right? So I haven't seen when we kind of talk about like enlightened beings, or not even enlightened beings, but spiritually developed beings, one of the interesting historical things that we can look at is sometimes you'll have people who have done a lot of spiritual practice who will then open their mouths. And when they open their mouths, they speak in such a way that it like connects with a lot of people. And so religions will spring up around these people, right? So you'll have people like Ram or Krishna, Mahavir, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad. People who religions spring up around. Now, are those people enlightened or not? Like unclear. But we certainly know that there are people who will have profound impacts on the people around them. That's like historical fact. Now, what's responsible for that? Is it necessarily spirituality, right? So there are also other human beings that may not have had spiritual practice, may not have been enlightened, who are able to do that. We have civil rights activists. We have people who will, Sun Tzu and like different political leaders. So it's not just that spiritual tradition is the only way to do that. So maybe it has nothing to do with it. But in my sense, really what's going on with marijuana is that it actually like frees you from your mind and allows you to fully engage in the world, but it doesn't let you transcend mind at all. Now, I think some of the other psychedelic substances also do let you transcend mind in a greater way than marijuana. So if you look at some of these things like psilocybin and stuff like that may let you transcend mind. But that too feels to me like a enhancement or a vividness of that experience. Whereas in my primary experiences of meditation, it's like, it's a lot simpler than people think it is. So to like understand the nature of the universe is not like a grand thing. It's just like so simple. It's like the way that a child understands gravity, like you can understand karma. But a child is not amazed by gravity. It's not like mystical. It's just like the most simple thing. And once you understand karma, once you have sort of like a spiritual experience of karma, it becomes like simple. It's just the gravity of the universe. Even gravity is a manifestation of karma, because what goes up must come down. And so when people sort of say, and this is the last thing that I'll say about using substances, I do think people can get dependent on it. So the last thing that I'd say, this is the analogy that I tend to use for people, is that you can fly to the top of a mountain or you can hike to the top of a mountain. The view is going to be the same. The difference is that if you're flying, there's theoretically only so high that you can go, although you can go into space, I suppose. That's not really a fair analogy. But if I get into a helicopter and a pilot takes me to the top of the mountain, the view is going to be the same, but then I'm not in control of it. So this is the one thing that I think is very different, is that when you use a substance, generally speaking, you're at the behest of the substance. You don't actually control what happens. You may have some amount of lucidity and direction and evoking experience and maybe trying to explore in this direction, but you're not in control of it. Whereas when you meditate, it's very different. So I'd say that, substances can get you to 20,000 feet, but if you want to get to the top of Everest, you need meditation. The last thing that I'll leave y'all with is there's actually one group. So when I say this stuff, what do I base it on? Okay. So there's one group of people who are both very accomplished meditators and very accomplished substance users. So there's a sect of spiritual practice called Aghori sadhana. And Aghori Babas will use alcohol and marijuana at least. I don't know if they've ever been exposed to things like Molly and ayahuasca. The interesting thing about Aghori sadhana, so this is the only thing that I can think of where you have a monk who uses drugs. So these are people who truly, because people who will use drugs, they may go to a meditation retreat, but it's not sitting in a cave in the Himalayas for a decade. It's just not the same. So this is where everyone wants to think that their tradition is better than the other tradition, right? There's an ego battle going on here, where the monks are oh shit, if people can just get high and learn everything that we know, then they don't need us anymore. They feel threatened. And the people who are using drugs, I hate to break this to you, if you use marijuana and, I've worked with a lot of people who will use marijuana and other substances, and they will use whatever justification they can to use the substance. People who like something want to say it's good, right? So we see this. This is normal human thinking. Oh yeah, I really love my religion, and it's the best. You should try it too. And other people who say that their religion is just as good, nah. I can get everything that your religion can get, but I can get it easier and faster, and I can use pot while doing it. So you got to be careful about that. Okay? I'm not saying that it's absolutely true. You just got to be careful. So the human mind, what it likes to think is good, which is also evolutionary, right? So even when you think about reinforcement of eating a Twinkie versus dirt, one we like more, and that's because it's kind of better for us. So our brain is connected like and good. There's a reason why the human mind does that. Okay? So the Aghori sadhana. So here's the key thing about the Aghori sadhana. The Aghori sadhana is temporary. It's a phase of meditation training that is used to help Aghori sadhus, like Aghori monks, recognize what the nature of reality is. So when you have this enhanced nature of reality through an altered state of consciousness or an altered state of reality, when you have the state of reality through this kind of consciousness, state of reality through this kind of consciousness, state of reality through this kind of consciousness, that is what allows you to really deduce what is ultimately the true reality. So what changes and what stays the same. And even through substance alteration, they have a very good sense of this. So there are a couple of things that are important to understand about Aghori sadhana. The first is that it's temporary. So people don't say Aghori sadhus their entire life. People, before they become Aghori sadhus, usually are directed to Aghori sadhana by their guru. So they'll be celibate and sober for a long ass time. And then their teacher will say, now you need to go and spend 5 years with the Aghori sadhus and learn what they have to learn and then come back. So they'll go and they'll learn, they'll get high every day for a few years, and then they'll come back and then they'll give it up. And they go back to the path of meditation. And so it can be used, it has been used in some spiritual traditions, but based on, and that's really the best data I can think of. Data is kind of it's not a scientific study, but there's really only one sect that I can think of, maybe there are more, that really has explored and been using substances as an adjunct to meditation for thousands of years. And the conclusion that they ultimately come to is that you can learn from it, but it's like high school, and then you go off to college, which implies to me that there are states of meditation that can be attained without substances that are superior to what you can get through substances. So Rastas and Rastafarians are, first of all, not thousands of years old. And secondly, so they combine spiritual practices with marijuana, but I don't know that they use rigorous techniques of meditation. Maybe Sufi sects, now that I think about it. That could be the other one. Questions? Yeah, so ayahuasca shamans, that's another sect. So I'm not too familiar with their practices very much. I also am not familiar with what kind of meditation they do, if any. Honestly, I just don't know. But I think that it's fair to say that the most robust tradition of meditation, I may offend people, comes out of like Southeast Asia. Right? I think we kind of know that. Like, I think that's historically accurate. Now, I'm not saying that Christians and Muslims and Native American shamans didn't meditate to some way, but I think if you look at the sophistication and development of meditative practices, it's the most robust in like Southeast Asia. Did I say my religion is best? No. I simply said that that religious tradition, I think, has the most well-developed tradition of meditation. Didn't say it was best. I think that's more historical. Although if people disagree, I mean, I'm not a historian. It's just I haven't seen. So there are like, actually, I take that back. So I think like Jewish Kabbalah, for example, like may be similar. But I think there's just more people that have done meditation and developed meditation if you look at East Asia and South Asia than like people who practice Kabbalah. That's what I mean by most well-developed. So if you just like literally look at the number of meditation teachers that India, China, Japan, Korea, even Pakistan has produced, and the number of classes taught on meditation, the number of meditative techniques, I want to say that that part of the world has produced the most. No one said it equates quality. I'm just saying it's the most robust, not the best. Right? I'm just saying it's the deepest, not the tastiest. Have you read the I Ching? I've tried. I couldn't make sense of it, head or tails of it. Do I think mental health hypochondria exists? Sure. Why not? Texas was saying it feels to me like a giant koan. That's a great way to put it. It's beyond me. Okay, chat, we're running long, but it was great to talk to y'all. I know that this meditation and marijuana stuff is like a hot topic. I also recognize that I may be biased, right? So I grew up in a tradition that was very anti-substance use. I think I've changed my mind somewhat based on scientific studies on the benefits of substances, which I still do not recommend that anyone uses because those studies are preliminary. And I think this is something that I've seen is that sometimes the monks and the spiritual traditions don't like it when science says, oh yeah, you don't need to meditate for a decade in a cave. You can just take this pill and you'll get there. And sometimes people are reluctant to accept that. But I think unfortunately, like when I look at it really critically, I do think that there are arguments to be made for using substances in conjunction with meditative practice, and there are spiritual traditions that have done that. And unfortunately, I think that the nature of those substances are not going to get you to where Patanjali and Buddha and Adi Yogi and Shiva and these people are telling you to go. Yeah, so it's just hard to know about some of these other substances because a lot of what I'm inferring comes from substances that are somehow described or were used by monks who are very, very adept, right? Yeah. Adiyogi and Shiva are probably the same. We don't really know, right? Okay, so who are we rating, chat? Yeah, Poppy War's pretty good. VSNZ. Mitch? Is Mitch rating? Are you familiar with the story of Baba Ramdas giving LSD to an Indian guru? No, I'm not. Sounds like a good one, though. All right, we'll raid Mitch. We'll see y'all on the flip side. I don't know what that means. I don't know when I'll see y'all next. Take care.